And since we're revealing our churches, I'm Elizabeth Troyer Miller. I attend a Mennonite church, but our neighbors are Methodist, and I love you all. No. We, in Wood River, where I'm from, our ministerial association is tight, and so there's a lot of crossover between how our churches work together. So the denominational relationships are very important. So I wanted to know that because I'm curious. I'm just going to ask some questions before I dive into our content, because I want to make some connections between this transfer of wealth and what it means to you, because it can feel like it's distant if your work is ministry and you're really living and breathing the spiritual work of your congregation. I should also reveal my husband's a pastor, my dad's a pastor, so I'm PK. So I get it, and talking about money can sometimes be really uncomfortable, but we all have to deal with money, right? Money is so much a part of our lives, and some of us, it's easy. We have a job that pays enough, we pay all our bills, we can be generous with that, but that's not true for everybody in your congregation. And so it can be hard then sometimes to talk about money because everybody has a different struggle with it. And here we are talking about wealth and what to do with wealth. And from from our faith perspective, it's about stewardship, right? How do we care for this money that we have that really isn't ours and can definitely not go with us? And so those are all pieces. I'm curious for the clergy in the room, how many of you intentionally preach sermons on stewardship and talk about financial stewardship? Yes. Do you get a lot of responses from your congregants from those sermons? Do people give you much response? Maybe that's normal for all sermons. So you have to have the one that really strikes it. But when thinking about, so the Nebraska Community Foundation, Kristine said, I'm going to be talking about the transfer of wealth, and we have this study. I have some booklets here, so I'll pass these around. So if anybody wants to grab one, and maybe I should just grab more so y'all can look while I'm talking. I don't know if I grabbed enough, so you might have to help me out here. The Nebraska Community Foundation, who I work for, is based out of Lincoln. We were established in 1994, so we're turning 30. And this year we are celebrating our 30th anniversary, and this is wonderful. And really what our focus is on is helping communities to, now thinking about it as capturing their wealth, reinvest in their community and make their community the place that they want to live and work and thrive, and really thinking about thriving communities. And so we work with communities to think about their future. And so we are working in, you can see our footprint is wide and vast, 269 communities, 82 counties. Some of our funds are donor advised funds, some of them are community-based unrestricted endowment accounts. So we have a lot of different relationships with our communities and with people across the state. But just to give some examples of some of that work, and as Kristine was saying, like thriving communities are important for thriving congregations, right? You want to have places that people want to move to, and that also helps with your with how the church is thriving. So we will support our community affiliated fund. That's kind of our bread and butter, is helping communities establish an affiliated fund. Essentially, it's like a community that's small enough that they can't have their own foundation, and so they can have an account, similar to how congregations have an account. And so we'll support them in fundraising for special projects. In Pender, it was around a community center. In Red Cloud, it's supporting their heritage tourism, childcare in Boone County. But ultimately, it's not those projects that they're fundraising for. As they grow those unrestricted endowments, they have funds to reinvest in projects that they can't even foresee into the future. So it's really trusting that there's a future, and trusting that there's a future we want to invest in. how many of you are familiar with unrestricted endowments? Is that a term you know? Just want to make sure, because for those of you who don't, if you didn't raise your hand, or you didn't raise your hand because you didn't want to say it, unrestricted endowment is essentially we're holding the funds, you're investing those funds into an account, you're never touching the principal. The principal is always there, those funds are invested, and the return on that is then what the community, percentage of that is what the community then can invest into community projects, any nonprofit connected community project. So we help support our communities through the work of staff, but also peer resourcing, because we think the more people who understand the value of thinking into the future, investing with our funds now and into the future is critical to thriving and helping communities. So one of the things that in maybe over 20 years ago, we did our first transfer of wealth study. And this was really a first of its kind, and I was thinking about what is happening as funds are transferred from one generation to the next in that kind of estate transfer. What's happening with those funds? Where are they going? How much is there? What could be captured? Because it's really an untapped resource in philanthropy for any foundation, right? When we think about gifts that come with estate planning, that makes a significant difference. Whether it's a gift outright to your church, I'm sure many of you have experienced that a gift comes in and you can do something, maybe designated for an upgrade to a building upgrade, to an element of ministry, but sometimes they're directed to an endowment, and it forces you to think about like the future, because you're not getting that money just to spend right now, but the congregation is able to benefit from that investment. So the transfer of wealth study, which now you have kind of a copy of the summary, was something that compiled this information on funds being transferred from one generation to the next. And when we started to do this, like I said, it was the first of its kind, but has really caught wind. As Kristine was saying, it's really beneficial to know and be able to communicate that there's an incredible amount of wealth that is changing hands every day. And when we are aware of that, it allows us to have more open conversations, to say like, well, how are you thinking about your wealth? When you pass on, what are you doing with it? And how do you want that to benefit the community around you? And in your cases, your congregation, your church, the sustainability and the future of your church. And jump in if there's anything that you want to tie and connect, because I know you talk about this a lot. But what we know is that Nebraska is blessed with abundance. There is a lot of money that is changing hands. And I think significantly is that, especially in our ag industry, you can feel like farmers they don't have the cash in hand, but in that estate transfer, there's a lot of funds that are changing hands. So we're blessed with abundance. Everything we need, we believe, everything we need is right here where we are. Everything and everyone when we work together. And again, that investing in the future. But in the United States, this transfer of wealth can be accounted for about $11.8 trillion in the next 10 years, and $100 trillion in the next 50 years. And what's interesting about that is right now we're like kind of moving into that peak baby boomer transfer of wealth. Like we're gonna see for the next couple of decades some significant transfer of wealth. And so having conversations with folks about what their plans are is critical right now. I'm just gonna, since I have to turn my back to you, I'm gonna just put them all up. So there's 4 main points here to the transfer of wealth, which I've kind of talked about, but we have incredible wealth, and all Nebraska communities have wealth to give. The wealth is transferring now. It is right now, we're at this peak transfer moment for majority of the counties in Nebraska. So we really need to act with some urgency. We believe talking about this is critical. Inviting people to really consider in their estate planning, how are they thinking about a return to their community, a return to their congregation. Our communities need these assets, and many are already successfully putting them to work. We have communities with millions of dollars in unrestricted endowments that are able to reinvest and make sure things are staying. They're able to preserve things, they're able to activate new things. Some examples of this would be a huge estate gift out in Keith County allowed them to basically save their health system, the ambulance system, because they got short notice. I don't know if any of you heard about this when it happened. There was just like months notice, 6 months notice that the ambulance system was going to be stopped being supported out of Scotts Bluff area. And so they had to make some decisions and make them fast, but because they had received this significant estate gift, their local affiliated fund had they have quite a large payout, and they were able to commit hundreds of thousands of dollars to support that, a creative solution that was a partnership with the city and the county and the health system. And because there was this trust that there's a future investment, they were able to make decisions very quickly to save that. We don't know what the future is for our communities, for your congregations, but this is a way to prepare. And finally, this last piece is when we leave some of our wealth to the places where it was made and accumulated, we can ensure a more prosperous future for our Nebraska hometowns. I'm going to pause there because I can sometimes fire hose people. Does anybody have any questions or comments or things that come to mind as I'm talking? Anything you want to add?
I will.
Okay.
Eventually.
Eventually. Okay. So here in Nebraska, what we're seeing is that there is this transfer is happening now. We think there's about $100 billion happening in the next 10 years. And it's not so much important to like fixate on these numbers. The numbers can make significant impact. But just think about the impact it can have on your community. If you are talking about this and people are thinking and planning now in their estate plans, this is all over the state. So in your community, there's transfer of wealth. There's individuals in your congregation. There's people in your community who have the opportunity to give back. In the study, just so you can kind of break that down, if you open it up in the center panel, you'll see this same image. But we have it broken up by different regions of the state, just to get a sense of what those amounts are. And so you'll be able to see up close some of those numbers. But every county, even some of our very underpopulated counties, have quite a bit of quite a significant amount of money that is changing hands. And what we know is there's a lot of out-migration. You know, families lived on a farm, families lived in a community, had a business, but oftentimes their children didn't return. So their wealth is leaving the community when they pass on, because oftentimes the gift goes to family members who have left the community, maybe in a metro part of the state, or they may be not in the state entirely. And so that's why we at NCF feel like it's so critical now to be talking about this, so that the places where you earn your wealth, you're also reinvesting. And you know, a case can be made for the places where you've lived and you've worshipped and you've been, you know, formed. There's a reason to keep thinking about the sustainability of that place as well.
So this is just so important to me, okay? So, sorry.
Go.
So, look. And this is my understanding correctly, this is just the transfer from baby boomers to their kids leaving the state. It might not even be like the kids are still in the state and staying in the state, but this is all billions of dollars leaving the state of Nebraska. So, no, this is not church specific. Yes, Nebraska Community Foundation is technically a competitor of Nebraska United Methodist Foundation, but we all need to work together for our communities to be healthy places for our people want to live and stay, and then for our churches to thrive and get new members in too. So this is where I start with my Legacy Society presentation. So if you want me to come talk to your church about a Legacy Society, I start here because this is where people need to remember in their wills and estate plans that billions of dollars are leaving. And Elizabeth will talk about it, I'm sure. The Nebraska Community Foundation has the 5 to Thrive campaign. Just remember to leave 5% of your estate plan to something, and then you'll do the data, I'm sure. But then I'm talking to churches, maybe it's tithing. Maybe think about 10% going back to your church, and the other 90% can go to your kids. They're gonna be fine. Your kids are gonna be fine. Your church might not be fine. And if everyone does 5% or 10%, if everyone does 5% or 10%, it could be millions and billions of dollars in an endowment fund for your church so that it can make it through whatever this regression in attendance is, so it can survive and be there for when people do start to come back to church again. And so that's what I'm really passionate about, is getting that education across. We don't have the bandwidth to do how many United Methodists are across the state and gonna be like transferring wealth. So Nebraska Community Foundation already did the data for the general public, and I'm gonna use that data. So this is just so important, and really, really think about how this could help your congregation with these numbers. Okay, thank you.
Yep, that was good. That was good. Any questions on that? Go ahead.
Kristine, I don't think
Hi,
that's
Dan.
quite right. 'Cause I'm on the committee with this transfer of wealth, and that is really, it does look like that's leaving the state, but it's not leaving the state. That's just a transfer from one generation to the next. And the state of Nebraska is doing a study to see how much is leaving the state. And now as lawyers, when we do the inheritance tax and show the transfer of value, we have to now fill out a report how many of the heirs were out state and how many of them live in the state. And so they're working on a study for that.
That'll be great data to have.
Yeah, but
Thanks for
that
clarifying.
it kind of looks like it's leaving the state.
It's all going to Iowa, right? Not Iowa, no.
But no, that's just the transfer from one generation to the next.
Thanks for clarifying.
Okay.
Yeah, you should actually be doing this. Feel free to jump in and correct me too. So, yeah, big picture. This is one generation to the next. It's a lot of money changing hands. And you're right to say like that percentage in church language, tithing 10% is the portion you may be thinking about. So here's just an image of the peak transfers. You can kind of see the Interstate 80 corridor is a little bit later. We just have younger ages there. But we are in the midst of this peak transfer period for the majority of the state. We have aging populations in our rural communities. Now is the time to be having these conversations. So 5 to Thrive, thank you for the tee up. 5 to Thrive is what we have been really pressing. It's not just about Nebraska Community Foundation. It's right that we care about this, but so does the foundation here, and so does your foundation. So like this is important for everyone. Once our wealth leaves the community, it's gone forever. Once our wealth is endowed in our community, it's here forever. The time to act is now. The opportunity has never been greater. And you can see that with like the timelines that we're looking at. Now is the time. So 5 to Thrive is it's really a marketing campaign that we started in 2021. Really trying to push it across the state just to get everybody thinking about that. Kind of that subtle messaging, 5%, because it really is about that percent, 5%. And we're seeing our communities respond to that. We're seeing an increased number of communities, our affiliated funds, able to have conversations with members around the table, with the community at large, to say, our community is really important. We don't know what the next generation is going to need. You've been invested here. Would you consider leaving our local affiliated fund in your estate plans, just at that 5% level? My colleague, Todd Meckelberg, he carries around a bushel of corn. I don't have a bushel of corn. I actually have a box of tomatoes, which I thought about bringing in, but it felt a little messy. So I decided to opt out of the tomatoes. But the visual is, how many of you have seen a bushel of corn? Are you familiar with, like, kind of think about a box? If you skim 5% off of that bushel, do you notice a difference? I mean, if you had a really keen eye, you would maybe see it. But there's still a lot of corn in that bucket. And so when we're inviting people to think about 5%, we're really trying to help them put into perspective, what is that conversation around need? Because I think what we know is everyone wants to leave the next generation, not everybody. A lot of people are thinking about the next generation, their children in their estate plans, wanting to make sure that their children are set up for success, but how much their children actually need. And trying to invite this conversation about, like, where are your priorities? Your children are important, the next generation is important, right? And what does this mean for this community that has served you and you have served for your lifetime, if you've been there your whole life? And consider that 5%, is that going to impact meeting the needs of your children, meeting the needs of other things that you want to give to? Kristine, do you have anything that you want to tag in there? Dan, I'm going to turn to you. Do you have anything that you would tag in there?
Well, one of the conversations is, that we have with clients that have any charitable inclination at all. We try to find out what that is and then try to support whatever. We don't try to direct anyways in particular unless they have no guidance at all, and they just tell us where they lived and what's important to them and who they do generally support. But so we talk about give where you live, and then that's what we try. And how much is enough? I mean, you're leaving your kid, is $1 million per child enough? I mean, maybe they're worth more than that. I mean, how much is enough? And sometimes that gets them thinking about, really they need. We want our kids to be self-sufficient. We wanted them to go out. One of the comments I got from one of my clients was we didn't raise our kids to be waiters. And I thought, what do you mean by that? He said, well, we don't want them waiting on us to die to get their inheritance. So we tried to educate them. We wanted to get them out and get a job and support themselves. We didn't want them to raise them to be waiters. So that's another thing that we talk about.
Thank you. So I jump ahead here. So just to put in perspective our work, I'm thinking about endowments and what that does for community. Again, we're really community focused. That is our bread and butter, is thinking about how do we help small communities grow their unrestricted endowment, think about their future and their future interests. As far as kind of tracking our progress, in 2014, we had 102 affiliated, community-focused affiliated funds. So that would be communities, essentially. Communities and sometimes counties. And at that point, there's $52.5 million endowed, and we had 31.7 million identified as being kind of total expectancies. We have seen those endowments grow 10 years to more than double. So we have $132.3 million endowed, and a little bit more in planned gifts, which means that those have been realized and more have come into place. And why I share this is when we are talking about these things and inviting, a lot of this growth is because people are inviting in their communities, inviting their friends and their neighbors to say, consider investing in our community. And without that conversation, it doesn't happen. And so I hope you can see how this transfer of wealth can impact your own congregation, can be maybe impactful for you thinking about your own estate planning and what that might mean for you, for where you live, leave a legacy gift. And with that, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add?
Not too much. We'll let you ask a few questions, but I just wanted to piggyback off what Dan just said. I'm thrilled you talked to your clients about that, because I know a lot of attorneys don't, so I appreciate that. But when you said, you asked them how much is enough, it got me thinking about, I want to recommend a book to you. It's written by Mark A. Weber, called The Spectrum of Legacies. It's a really good book to know how to talk to your children, to your family, about what you want to do for your kids and if you want to do anything for your community. In fact, we were going to have a presentation on it today that Sharon has prepared, and again, if you would like to hear that presentation, please invite us to your church. But that is a really great book to help you understand how much is enough for yourself to finish living the rest of your life with enough, and noticing what 5% actually would look like and the difference it could make in your local community. So I'd highly recommend that book if you haven't read it yet.
And if you haven't read that book yet, I'm going to be starting a book club in January, so come see me. I'll write down your email address and we will figure out a way for you to affordably get that book, and then we will, for 2 or 3 months, discuss that a couple of times a month.
Cool. Can you say the title again?
A Spectrum of Legacies. Mark A. Weber has 2 books. The first one he wrote is similar, like the Legacy Spectrum. The Legacy Spectrum. His second book, A Spectrum of Legacies, is leaps and bounds a much better book. Nothing against Mark and the books or anything, but the second one really, I don't know, hones it in, makes it's an easy read, and it's got step-by-step processes. It's got letter templates to send to your kids if you need it. It's a really great book.
And if you like to consume things through audio or visual, we did do a lunch and learn with him. It would have been this spring. And so in Nebraska Community Foundation, we have a bunch of archived webinars, resources for anybody. You don't have to be affiliated, you don't have to give to us, they're just resources for anybody. So you can check that out on our website.
And that book is available on Audible as well, for those of us who listen to books while we drive.
Any way you read, the book's available.
Any questions I can answer for you?
Not a question, but a comment. My background is a 45-year banking career. So I dealt with people's money all the time. And the issue that I see today is, and perhaps at any time in history, you know, we have concerns, but today, when I look at people and talk with people, it seems there's such an unknown of what the future is. When we look at the world and what is going on, and to think that, what am I going to do with my money? And if in my family I have a child who is disabled, and I know that I need to provide for their care, there's a lot of those issues that tug at my heart that says, I have to control and be careful what I do here, not to even mention the markets and what may happen. You mentioned 32 million, but 6 months from now, that may not be the case. I dealt with that all the time, and you know what I'm talking about. So there's a lot of unknowns there that we as individuals and churches have to work with. We have an older congregation, and they've come through some bad times, and they're not too eager to turn loose of the strings of what they have put together. And so I see in our church, and I say this for Kristine as well, I see this as one of the roadblocks that we have to cover. I mean, fine, come out to our church, but but there may not be very many that wanna talk to you about what they're gonna do with their money, because, they've got a lot of things on their back as to how they're going to, what they're responsible for,
Yeah. Yes.
so.
Yep. I don't know if you wanna.
Well, we've run into that, Homer, in other churches.
I'm sure you have.
Yeah, so I would just encourage for any of the people that are willing to meet with us individually and just have conversations about it, we'd love to do that with them. Otherwise, we're addressing our approach and how we present it to, maybe help approach those people a little bit better.
Here's a question that wonder if you could speak to, because it sounds like one of the things you'd like to see churches do is that unrestricted endowment. How does that work when you're not feeling hopeful about even the future of your church and where the church may be?
Right.
How do you guys address that as far as setting up those accounts, and when there's the future of a church doesn't feel hopeful?
And I mean, we can't, if people are struggling with that perspective shift, I mean, we can't, all we can do is just keep coming in and educating over and over and over again. But if we can't get over that hurdle and they're expecting the next generation to make up for it with their weekly giving, the church just might not survive. And we don't want that. If there aren't any churches to serve, then we don't exist either. So, that's where the unrestricted endowment is so important to us, because that next generation isn't as generous, or they're generous in different ways, I should say. They're giving differently rather than the weekly offering that keeps the church going. And so that's where I am relying heavily on the baby boomer generation doing their estate planning so that church can survive for whenever that next generation is like, oh, this is important to me, I do need to think about giving in a different way, or the church just simply is going to close.
Is it possible that you're not necessarily giving into an endowment for this specific church, but for church in general? Because I hear you say you're giving back for new church plants and new church grants and things. Can people give not necessarily to like this specific church, because they don't know what's gonna happen with this church, but is there an endowment that's like just for general church?
Yeah, I mean, that's why we exist, is we hold funds and we serve all of Nebraska United Methodist churches. And if somebody wanted to leave an endowment in our new church starts, then they could. We talked to them about designating that however they would like to. We don't have like an unrestricted endowment fund for all churches across the state.
Okay. So maybe the Nebraska Community Foundation would be a way that you could direct somebody, because it still would help your community, but might not necessarily help that church.
If they wanna do something for their specific community, but it's not church specific, I absolutely would send them to the Nebraska Community Foundation or the Kearney Area Community Foundation. Keating's back there.
That's where we would send you to if you were from Kearney.
No, we complement each other.
Yes, that's exactly right.
No, I was gonna say, we have a couple actually, which is interesting, we have several Methodist endowments at the Community Foundation for smaller communities. And so, that particular donor had, they love their community, they want to take care of their Methodist church in their community, but there's a clause in there that says, for some reason that church closes, wherever those, I'm gonna pick on Elm Creek, so wherever the Elm Creek Methodists go, they may not have a church in the community, then that would follow them. So let's say they transfer and go over to Overton or Kearney, that money would follow wherever their people go. I hope that helps, so, because sometimes that changes, especially for small communities.
Sure.
It's all about designating, if
And
that's what it is.
if they're really more concerned about keeping it in that community, though, the clause can be adjusted to say it stays in that community, even if that church closes.
Okay, that's helpful.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. We'll let her leave.
She just